The ledger was found in 1891 tucked beneath rotting floorboards of a burned plantation house in southern Georgia. 28 years after the transaction, the handwriting was meticulous. 12 names, 12 ages ranging from 4 to 14. 12 prices totaling $8,400. All sold on December 25, 1863. But it was the final entry that made the county clerk's hands tremble. A single word written in different ink in a shaking hand that barely resembled the previous entries. Forgive what the authorities discovered in the days following that Christmas would challenge every assumption about justice, guilt, and the weight of a single night. The master's name was Silas Hargrove, and by dawn on December 26, something had changed him so profoundly that those who knew him claimed he was no longer the same man. Some said it was divine retribution. Others whispered of something far more terrifying, something that came for him in the darkness of that holy night when the world celebrated peace and he had committed an act so cruel that even hardened men turned away in disgust. The truth buried in testimonies, letters, and the fragmented memories of those who survived is more disturbing than any legend. Because what happened to Silas Hargrove that night wasn't supernatural. It was entirely horrifyingly human. And what makes this story even more chilling is that every detail can be traced back to documented records, witness accounts, and the physical evidence that remained long after everyone involved had turned to dust. Before we continue with the story of Silas Hargrove and the 12 children whose lives he sold for profit on the holiest day of the year, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. And please leave a comment telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love knowing where our audience is. Now, let's uncover what really happened on that Christmas night in 1863. The Hargrove plantation sat 7 miles south of Valdosta, Georgia on land that had been in the family since 1809. By 1863, it was one of the few states in the region still operating at near full capacity despite the war that had been tearing the nation apart for nearly 3 years. While other planters had lost their labor force to Union raids or Confederate conscription, Silas Hargrove had managed to keep his operation intact through a combination of brutal discipline and geographic isolation. The plantation house itself was an imposing 2-story structure with white columns that had long since grayed with neglect. The paint peeled in long strips, revealing wood darkened by decades of humidity and heat. 6 windows faced the front yard, their glass warped with age, reflecting distorted images of anyone who approached. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, and during heavy rains, water would drip through the ceiling of the second-floor hallway, creating a rhythmic sound that echoed through the empty rooms. Surrounding the main house were the quarters, 23 small cabins arranged in 2 rows, each housing multiple families. The cabins were constructed of rough-hewn pine logs chinked with mud and moss that had to be replaced every spring. Each cabin measured roughly 12 by 14 feet and housed anywhere from 4 to 8 people. There were no windows, only wooden shutters that could be propped open during the day. The floors were packed dirt and the roofs were made of cypress shingles that leaked during storms. Beyond the quarters stood the cotton field stretching toward a line of pine trees that marked the edge of Hargrove land. 300 acres of cotton, though only about 200 were actively cultivated by 1863. The soil was red clay, difficult to work, and the yields had been declining for years. But Silas refused to acknowledge the decline, insisting in his ledgers that the land was as productive as it had been in his father's time. Between the fields and the quarters stood the work buildings, a cotton gin house, a blacksmith's forge, a carpentry shop, a smokehouse, and a large barn that stored equipment and served as a punishment site when Silas deemed it necessary. The gin house was the largest structure on the property aside from the main house, a cavernous building with a dirt floor and massive wooden gears that separated cotton fiber from seed. The sound of the gin during harvest season was deafening, a constant grinding and clanking that could be heard for miles. Silas Hargrove was 47 years old in December of 1863. He stood just under 6 foot tall with a thin frame that had grown thinner over the years. His hair, once dark brown, had turned mostly gray, and he wore it combed straight back from a high forehead. His face was angular, all sharp lines and prominent bones, with deep-set eyes that rarely made direct contact with anyone. He had a habit of pursing his lips when he was thinking, creating deep lines around his mouth that made him look perpetually disapproving. Those who dealt with him in business described him as methodical, cold, and obsessed with maintaining control. He kept detailed records of everything. Crop yields, weather patterns, expenditures, and the names, ages, and estimated values of every enslaved person on his property. His ledgers filled an entire bookshelf in his study, each one labeled by year and category. He would spend hours reviewing them, making notations in the margins, calculating projections for future harvests. But there was something else in those ledgers, something that wouldn't be discovered until after his death. Interspersed among the business entries were personal observations written in a smaller, more cramped handwriting. Brief notes about the people he enslaved. Ruth's boy Marcus shows aptitude for carpentry. Bess, age 4, sickly, may not survive winter. Thomas learning blacksmith trade, value increasing. These weren't compassionate observations. They were assessments, the same way a farmer might note which livestock were thriving and which were failing. Silas had been raised to view slavery as a natural order, an economic necessity, and a social structure ordained by God. His father, Nathaniel Hargrove, had owned the plantation before him and had instilled in Silas a rigid worldview. There were those who were meant to lead and those who were meant to serve. Questioning this order was not only foolish but dangerous. It threatened the entire foundation of their society. Nathaniel Hargrove's death in 1856 left Silas as the sole heir to the plantation, a burden he accepted without sentiment. His brothers were gone, his inheritance uncontested, and his purpose fixed. Where others saw family, Silas saw continuity, land preserved, labor controlled, order maintained. His marriage to Catherine Brennan had been no more than another transaction. She brought money. He brought land. Their union produced children quickly but never warmth. Catherine's quiet piety and private sorrow became part of the house's atmosphere, as constant as the creaking floorboards. When she died giving birth to their stillborn son, something essential in Silas calcified completely. He buried her, sent the children away, and retreated fully into numbers and control. By the winter of 1863, control was slipping. The war had crushed markets. Cotton rotted unsold. Creditors circled. Silas calculated endlessly, searching for a solution that would not require surrendering land or pride. When Virgil Tate's letter arrived, offering gold for children, Silas recognized the answer immediately: cold, efficient, final. The selection was methodical. 12 children chosen not for who they were, but for what they represented in numbers. He watched them in silence, noting health, skill, compliance. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself this was how survival worked. On Christmas Eve, when he read the names aloud, the plantation broke. Grief erupted in sounds that split the night. Mothers begged. Fathers stood frozen in helpless rage. Children cried without understanding. And Silas turned away. That night, sleep claimed everyone except the 12. What followed was not punishment, not vengeance, but revelation. In the fields, surrounded by firelight and silence, the children confronted him, not with threats, but with truth. Through their touch, Silas felt what he had denied his entire life: fear, grief, love, loss. Not abstract ideas, but lived reality. The human cost of every ledger entry pressed into him until he broke beneath it. By dawn, he understood. When Virgil Tate arrived with gold, Silas saw the children clearly for the first time, not as property, not as value, but as children. And he refused. The sale was cancelled. The gold was rejected. The plantation would fall, but something else was saved. In the weeks that followed, creditors seized land. Silas lost the house, the fields, the legacy. He disappeared from records soon after, a broken man who spoke little and avoided people entirely. But the children remained. Years later, when the burned house was uncovered and the ledger found, historians fixated on one detail, the final word written beneath the crossed-out names. Forgive. Not as a request. As a confession.